Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to give you my standard review of the Sony Alpha-1 50 megapixel full frame mirrorless sports/video/resolution camera. Sony just calls this the One because it does pretty much everything. You've heard of the jack of all trades and the master of none. Well, the Alpha-1 is essentially the jack of all trades and master of all. It is an extraordinarily advanced camera with tons of technical capabilities, but it does come with a price tag to match. I initially was turned off by that price tag of $6,500 US, which places it more than $2,000 more expensive. In fact, more than $2,500 more expensive than the Canon EOS R5. You could buy a Canon EOS R5 and an EOS R6 for the same price, or for that matter, you could buy yourself a Sony A7R Mark III and maybe even a Sony AS3 to pair together for the same price as well. So initially, it's just too expensive. But the longer I thought about it, the more that the appeal of the Alpha-1 grew on me, as I considered the fact that it could do everything that my A7R Mark III did and more. It could do everything that my A9 did and more. And so at the end of the day, here we are, and I have sold both my R3 and my A9 to actually people that follow this channel, and I hope that they get a lot of years of great use out of those cameras to help to fund the Alpha-1 that I'm filming on right now. And I'm using the Sony Zeiss planar 50mm f1.4 lens to film this review. I want to thank our sponsor of today's episode, which is Phantom Wallet, which has been a loyal supporter of this channel now for about a year and a half. Today's episode is brought to you by Phantom Wallet, the minimalist, modern wallet that sets you free from a bulky traditional wallet while also making it easy to access your cards and money when you need them, thanks to their unique fanning mechanism. Visit phantomwallet.com to check out their unique sizes, styles, and finishes that span from aluminum to wood to carbon fiber. You can even customize your wallet with new accessories like a money clip, cash holder, ID display, and even the Chipolo tracking integration if you're the kind of person who loses their wallet. Use code DUSTIN15 for 15% off when you're ready to check out. Thanks also to Camera Canada and the guys over there. They really went out of their way to help me in sourcing an Alpha-1. Supply's pretty scarce right now, but they really went to bat for me to make sure that I could get one and so that I could be doing this review for you here today. So thanks to Camera Canada. I found them to be a great retailer. I discovered them about a year ago, and I've bought basically everything that I have bought since that point from them, and they have done a great job. They've got a great website. So if you're in Canada, check them out, and they're a great retailer for that. Now today we are doing the standard review. If you missed or want the definitive review with a deep dive into all aspects of camera performance, you can find that here. Check that out. Today we're going to give you more of the highlights. So let's talk about build, handling, and features here. First of all, taking a look at the camera itself, you might have a similar reaction to my wife. When I showed her this new uber expensive camera that I had purchased, her response was, it looks like some of your other cameras. Fair enough. It does look very much like other cameras like the A7R Mark IV or the A9 Mark II, particularly the A9 Mark II, where there are a tremendous amount of similarities in the dial and button situation. What we have is very similar dimensions to those cameras, though we are just a little bit heavier here. I believe 737 grams, and that comes down mostly to having a more enhanced build quality, just more durable magnesium alloys in the construction, along with more advanced weather seals. And I think that finally we can lay to rest the perception that Sony's weather sealing is not up to snuff compared to the more established brands. They seem to have finally figured all of that out. And so that's where I believe that the extra weight comes in. Other than that, looking at the camera itself, you won't notice a lot of differences, but there are some important differences inside. One of the most notable standouts is that we have an incredibly improved viewfinder. 9.44 million dot, which is the highest resolution I've ever seen in a viewfinder, And to top that, it has up to a 240 frame per second refresh rate to allow it to keep up with high-speed action without blackout. And so obviously you don't want to necessarily engage 240 frames per second all the time, but if you're tracking fast action, that really allows you to have a seamless viewing experience. And I would say we're getting very close to rivaling the performance of an optical viewfinder, though with all of the advantages of an electronic viewfinder. So kudos to Sony on that. That's actually one of the things that turned me off a bit about the A9 Mark II, is that it didn't even have as high a resolution a viewfinder as what we found in the A7R Mark IV. And so nice to see a vastly improved viewfinder here. Another improvement is that while we don't have a larger LCD screen on the back, it's still a 3-inch with a 1.44 million dots of resolution. So that should have been upgraded, no question about it. But what is upgraded is touch capabilities. I've been harping on this for years with Sony cameras. It's great to see them finally respond to where now both the quick menu and the main menu can be navigated via touch. And it pretty much does everything that I would expect it to do. Basically, they've caught up to where Canon was years ago with their touch menu, but the responsiveness is improved, and it's just generally a better thing to use at this point. Another upgrade, which you can't see from the outside, is that the shutter mechanism, the mechanical shutter, has been upgraded to some carbon fiber parts. It is a very durable but also very low vibration shutter mechanism. And one thing that stood out to me is that, number one, I like the sound and the feel of it, but secondly, I noticed that it introduces so little vibration that I didn't really notice a difference in trying to handhold slow shutter shots between the electronic shutter and the mechanical shutter. One of the other things, however, that they have done here is that mechanical shutter, it does give you up to 10 frames per second, which sounds like this. But also as a part of that, they have upped the flash sync speed up to 1/400th of a second with the mechanical shutter, which I think is the highest figure that I've ever personally seen. But of course, this camera is really designed around an electronic shutter. That is the heart of things, where you get up to 30 frames per second, which is an incredible figure like I've never really seen before, particularly with such a high resolution body. But on top of that, they've managed to solve some of the major drawbacks of typically associated with electronic shutters, namely the fast readout from the sensor allows you to eliminate most of the rolling shutter effects, which means that even if you're panning, either doing stills or shooting video, sometimes if you have a lot of rolling shutter, things lean that should be upright. That's basically a non-issue here. On top of that, before, like the A9 for example, you had to switch over to mechanical shutter to have flash sync. No longer the case. You can get flash sync up to 1/200th of a second. So it's not as good as the mechanical shutter, but it's basically the same standard that we've seen on many cameras for years. So I like that. And you can use anti-flicker technology now with the electronic shutter, something you couldn't previously do when shooting with, or was maybe only available with mechanical shutter on some of the A9 bodies. So again, another nice upgrade as a part of that. So a lot of things that I have been impressed with. Now, you do have two card slots, and unlike previous Sony cameras, you now have the option here of either shooting with SD cards, UHS 2 compatible, or those same slots can be used for CF Express Type A cards. Now, those CF Express cards, they're expensive right now, and they're not all that common. And so I'm personally holding off on purchasing those, because the good news is that almost all functionality of the camera is available even while using V60 rated cards. And so I prefer the Sony Tough cards, which are V90 rated camera. And so I've not run into any issues. You can record, 4K 120, you can record 8K video, just not at the highest bit rate. You can shoot 30 frames per second. I've not really felt any kind of limiting due to using SD cards, so I'm going to hold on to those for a little while. So while things are not all that different on the outside, the grip feels better than ever, though I still like a grip extender because of having larger hands. And outside of that, it feels very familiar, but it is probably the best execution of a familiar design that we've seen before. Further upgraded is the autofocus system to where we now have 759 points that covers 92% of the sensor. That means that you'll have an autofocus point basically wherever that you're trying to track action on. And more importantly is that, there's a lot of lofty claims with focus points these days on cameras that seems to be kind of more marketing hype than anything. But what really matters here is that they have doubled the amount of calculations per second that the A9 Mark II could do, up to 120 calculations per second. That's both focus calculations and metering calculations to back up that. So that means that you're able to track action with effortless speed like never before, with up to 30 frames per second. Now, I did note that when I went out to track action, and thanks to Jengar Goldens for bringing out the dogs to allow me to track their action, but I shot some with the Sigma 100 to 400, and I could only manage about 15 frames per second, and I would say about a 70% perfectly focused rate. I switched over to the Sony 135mm f1.8 GM, and I unlocked the 30 frames per second, which I actually counted, and I got 30 frames per second. And beyond that, I also got basically 100% perfect focus. I mean, it was almost uncanny how well focused everything was, even shooting at f2. Very, very impressive. And so I will say on that note that if you want to unlock the most capabilities out of the Alpha-1, you probably need to pair it with a Sony lens, because it seems like that may be, some of the handshaking that is going on, that you're going to get best performance in terms of frames per second by using a native Sony lens. And so certainly worth a consideration. The buffers are correspondingly deep. You can get up to 182 extra fine JPEGs or as high as 400 fine JPEGs, 238 lossy RAWs. So if you drop to a lossless or uncompressed, either of those are going to put you right under 100 frames before the buffer starts to slow down. But I did find that the buffer clears fairly quickly, faster than at times before, and it seems like you can do more things while the buffer itself actually clears. They've also improved things, adding like a bird eye AF, and while it's not entirely foolproof, I did see it jump over from the bird's eye to the tail sometimes with the Canada geese that I was tracking. It did produce, very well focused results, and I was able to in this shot, for example, I just saw the bird take off out of my peripheral vision. I turned and fired without any chance, to really acquire focus. And I was actually really pleasantly surprised to see that it was a perfectly focused shot. And so they've done a great job with focus. Also, one thing that I did note is that they have improved IAF to where even if the subject is looking away and the camera can't really see the eye, it is actually able now to track the eye quite effectively. And so some great things on the autofocus front. I mean, as you can see from the action sequences, this is an amazing, amazing action camera that surpasses anything that I have previously used. Those autofocus capabilities also carry on into video, and unlike the A9 cameras that are somewhat limited in the video options, Sony threw everything into the Alpha-1. It basically has everything that you're going to find on an A7S III, and so it's pretty extraordinary that you have this high-resolution camera that's also an action camera, that's also an advanced video camera, which is pretty much unprecedented. And so in this case, you have all the way up to 8K 30 recording, and they've designed for heat dissipation in mind, so you get longer record times without the overheating issues that kind of plague the Canon new releases, the EOS R5 and R6. It has up to 4K 120 frame per second, which I really love, not just for stopping traditional action, but I find that it really adds some poetic quality to some things in nature, be it snow falling or the spring runoff. Slowing that down allows you to appreciate kind of the artistry of what's taking place. And so I actually personally love 120 frames per second, and I love not having to compromise on resolution to get it. And so that's fantastic. They've even included the S Cinetone profile, which I'm actually filming on right now, which is a great, versatile codec that isn't, like a log profile, but it has beautiful color and it actually matches very well with their Cine cameras, something that you'll find there. And it's got the full range of S-Log and HLG and basically all the good stuff. Tons of different bitrate options, different codecs. You've got a great amount of versatility on what kind of video you can capture and how you capture it. It's a fantastic camera on that metric as well. I also did some deep dive into the sensor, and while I'm not going to cover all of that here today, I found a lot of good things. Now, like the A9 cameras, this is a stacked BSI sensor, and the reason why it's stacked is because that allows the sensor to be able to have a very fast readout to pass that information into the pipeline as quickly as possible. And so the A9, although I actually really liked the feel of images off the A9, on a technical level, it wasn't even up to the level of the A7S III, or excuse me, the A7 III, in that had a similar 24 megapixel sensor, but had actually better dynamic range and even better high ISO performance. What I found with the sensor here on the ILCE-1 is that while it's the stack sensor and it has that incredibly fast readout, it also is delivering on the technical level in that it has very good high ISO performance, even for such a high resolution camera. And so I found that even at 50 megapixels, or excuse me, even at ISO 25,600 or even ISO 32,000, which is the top of the native range, that images I felt were useful in many applications with still retaining good levels of contrast and importantly, good color fidelity, no kind of color cast or tint or shift that took place. There is some, as you go up the range, the noise gets a little bit more obvious, but it never really became destructive, I felt, in the native range. And when I compared it to other cameras like the EOS R5, I found that I actually slightly preferred what I saw out of the ILCE-1. Also, when I looked at the dynamic range, Sony claims up to 15 stops. I'm not quite sure where they're calculating that. It's maybe a little bit of a high figure, but what I did find is that I'm getting very comparable results to their very best, like the A7R Mark III, the A7R Mark IV, in that in many situations, for example here, I could recover 5 stops of underexposure from the shadows and get a very clean result with no color shift, no real banding, a little bit of noise in some shadow areas, but really not bad at all. And so a lot of versatility there. And I could even get a credible 3-stop overexposure recovery, as you can see here. It was only at 4 stops where it started to have that slightly washed out look. But even so, when I compared with the R5 and my color swatches, there were still a lot more colors showing up on the ILCE-1 that I had lost on the EOS R5. And so at the end of the day, the sensor is really producing great things, and it has great resolution, a lot of ability to deeply crop an image like this to where you can create images from within images. And one other feature I will highlight, actually 2. One of those is that something we've been looking for, and that is having a lossless RAW option. And so you can shoot at reduced file size, which helps to manage the high resolution, but without losing any information. So it's a lossless compression. The other thing that I really like is that the APS-C mode is 21 megapixels, which is obviously a very useful figure. But on top of that, you also have an option for an oversampled full frame 21 megapixel JPEG option. And so what that means is you get really highly detailed JPEGs, but at a lower resolution point that could be very, very useful. For example, for me, if I was shooting events and wanted files to pass on to, whoever was hosting the event, or, in certain things where I don't need 50 megapixels and JPEGs will work, being able to get great looking JPEGs at a lower resolution point is actually a really valuable feature for myself. So at the end of the day, there's actually very, very little to complain about when it comes to the ILCE-1. It has incredible performance. The sensor performance is fantastic. The autofocus performance is fantastic. The video performance is fantastic. And while I don't love the ergonomics as well as, say, the Canon EOS R5, this is the best execution of a Sony camera that I've ever used before due to some of those fine details like, a better, having touch capability in the LCD, a great viewfinder, things like that, slightly better grip. And so, it's continued progress in the right direction. I really love the camera in every way, basically except the price. And it is incredibly expensive. So what that means is that it's not a camera for everyone. If you're a photographer that doesn't need like fast action, then and you're shooting mostly portraits or landscapes, an A7R Mark IV probably makes more sense for you. Or if you need the action but not the high resolution, one of the A9 cameras might make more sense. If you're just a video person, the A7S III is going to be maybe the better option for you. But if you're someone that wants it all and does it all, the ILCE-1 is giving you unparalleled performance. And a plus these days is that Sony has one of the richest catalog of lenses available. We complained about that a few years ago, but at this stage, they've got one of the richest catalog of lenses outside of maybe long telephotos of any brand that I've ever seen before. There are just so many great lenses at a lot of different price points, and that's an advantage that Canon just doesn't yet have on its RF system, to where you're primarily limited to more expensive lenses. So at the end of the day, the ILCE-1, while expensive, in some ways is worth the money if you need that much camera. I'm Dustin Abbott. If you look in the description down below, you can find linkage to my full text review. There's also linkage there to an image gallery with lots of different photos. I got a lot of photos I'm proud of from the camera, so check that out. There are buying links, and if you are interested, I recommend that you get in the queue, because right now the demand is outstripping the supply. And so the quicker you get in line, the quicker you'll get one for yourself. And of course, as always, there is linkage there to check out my merch with new options being added there. There's linkage to follow me on social media, to become a patron, sign up for my newsletter that comes out every Thursday. And of course, if you haven't already, please click that subscribe button right here on YouTube. Be sure to click that bell so you're notified when new content drops. Thanks for watching. Have a great day, and let the light in.